obviously extremely good team. Very different than the teams we faced most of the season, of course. In that way, it's reminiscent of the Dallas series last year because we hadn't really faced that iteration of Dallas. Of course, different players, different personnel. They present a lot of problems. Things you got to work through. But we're excited. We're excited for the opportunity, we're just putting it all together as we go through the week.
Is facing Luka with this team much different than the Dallas Luka, or like how do you approach him?
Yeah, listen, I think things certainly, every team's a little bit different. He's still the same amazing player. When the ball's in his hands, he just controls so much of the game and the way it's played. So we got to do a better job of disrupting that. There's certain things that we learned from being in a series with him last year that we have to put into action this year. Our discipline around him and those execution of those things, it has to be better. I think last year we were kind of like feeling our way through some of it, and then we're going to have to be ready to do a multitude of things.
How much do you, maybe you don't need it at this level, but how much do you simulate him in practice and scout team, and who can play a role like Luka because he's so hard?
We have our scout team ready, and it's hard to replicate everything he does. We have Joe Ingles kind of simulating some of the things, gives us a comp on size and IQ for sure. But it's certainly tough, and then obviously you got to try to simulate LeBron and the other guys around him. So,
Chris, Rudy said after the last game that for this matchup he feels like he has to dominate just with the size and think. Do you feel like that is going to be a key in just what you guys do in the front court against them?
I think we've been a team that traditionally leans into being big, and you got to do those types of things that big things do. That Rudy's been dominating for a number of games now, so I feel like it's going to continue to form for him. Absolutely, we need to have a big Rudy series for sure, no doubt about it. So.
At what pace do you think this series will be played, and how do you want to handle pace?
They run a lot. They love to throw the ball long. We're going to have to be super tight in transition. We're going to have to mitigate that. It's one thing that they got us on when we played them out there in February. They've got a lot of guys who really can rebound and create transition with the long pass. So covering that's going to be important.
And what about you guys?
Well, we're always stressing pace. We're one of the slower teams in the league, and that's never sat quite well. But we're going to have to try to get more pace in the game wherever we can. So.
There's something lit Rudy up over the last 2 months. He just looks like he's on a mission. The way he runs the floor, his commitment. Is there one thing you point to or something you see, or sometimes do guys get long in the tooth in their career and go, hey, man, it's finite now?
Yeah, I think, really, Rudy lit himself up. He told us coming into and out of the All-Star break that he knew what he had to do to return to his best form. He's done that. Early in the season, I think there was some normal frustrations, growing pains. Might have been fatigue coming out of the Olympics. It was two straight summers and a lot of basketball, and I think maybe he kind of purposely was in a lower gear, just maybe saving himself. But the Rudy we see now is the Rudy we've seen all last year, and the Rudy that we need to be the best team we can be.
Chris, with end-of-game execution, how is that something that you work with the group on? Is that more like a film thing on the floor? How have you guys?
Yeah, it's both. It's both, really, and we're lucky to have this chance to do it. We can look at several things. One, we can look at ourselves in general. We could, have closing options and a package to do so. But we also have to anticipate what the other team might do in those situations. And then we just rep it out on the floor. Those will be things that we'll get to a little bit later in the week. The earlier part of the week is more game plan install, and then, those special parts of the game we'll be closer to Saturday.
With LA being as good as they, like having personnel who you can kind of bank on, they're gonna know what they're gonna be doing in those end of games, does that kind of, I guess, elevate the necessity to be executing at those times in the game?
Well, for sure. It's no doubt about it. They got a lot of guys who can create a ton of offense for themselves, give them the ball, and they're basically an offensive ecosystem unto themselves. So yeah, it makes it easy for them.
You had a lot of time last year to prepare for the Phoenix series and prepare for the Denver series, but you just played those teams in the last week of the regular season. When that hasn't been the case, is it more of like an educated guess thing? Do you cast a wider net of possibilities of things?
Sure.
Before and how
Yeah,
it
I think
shake
so.
out?
We hadn't played this team, and I mean we got a little glimpse of them in February, but we didn't have Rudy, we didn't have Julius in that matchup, so we were a little bit undermanned where we were pretty good. So yeah, but we feel like we know who they are. They've kind of been trying to figure it out, and they look like a much better version of themselves. But we'll have to be ready to make adjustments as we go.
And then gauging where you guys are, you played pretty well over these last 20. There haven't been a lot of measuring stick games in there, so how do you properly gauge of this is where we're at, this is what we need to tighten up?
I think you can only play the schedule that's in front of you, so to speak, and we've been pretty happy with the way that we played for large parts. I think we've done a lot of the controllables well. Those are things you got absolutely must do in the playoffs, like take care of the ball and win the possession game and all that stuff. So if I'm measuring it by those accounts, I'd give ourselves a pretty decent grade and feel confident where we are.
Chris, when it comes to Julius and Dante, looking back on maybe when they first got here, the timing of the trade and those guys kind of having to uproot their lives right before the season starts, how much did you keep maybe what they were dealing with off the court in mind as you were helping them adjust on court to fit the organization?
Yeah, I think. Well, first of all, I would say this before getting into the specifics of that question is I give those two guys a lot of credit for really helping turn our season around in different ways. Dante, when he got finally became comfortable and locked in here and into his role, gave us the shot in the arm that we really needed. He started to make shots. He played with a ton of energy, made hustle plays, momentum plays. And was like an X factor off the bench. And then, Julius, we've talked about many times, like leaning into being like that playmaker role and doing a bunch of everything. So those two guys really kind of got it kick-started in different ways. And both of them came back from their injury playing at such a high level. I think it really propelled us down the stretch. To answer your question, I, certainly underestimated what they were dealing with. Probably off the floor more than on the floor, because on the floor through most of the early season, particularly preseason, it looked pretty seamless. Our offense looked really good. Everybody was in a good place. And then as the season started, things happened and we struggled. Then I think it just compounded. But, looking back, we should never obviously take for granted what these guys go through with these massive changes personally. But they were such great professionals that, in no way, shape, or form did it reveal itself in their basketball. I think their struggles were more related to just us and the fit, so.
This team has had a history of being distracted by the officiating and given everything that's surrounding the series. Is that something you're going to have to talk about?
Sure. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that you got to do to stay focused right now. I mean, we can't control that. I think we've done as a team, we've done a better job down the stretch here of just getting on about the business of basketball, and that's what it's got to be.
You mentioned Randle, you'll see him score 10 points, then 25 points. Is that the definition of someone that understands that game and what he needs to be?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's not panicked by the fact if he only gets 10 shots in a night. He's at the point now for us, and we've actually spoken about it multitude of times. He doesn't feel the pressure that he's got to go out and score 30 every night for us to win. He trusts his teammates. He's finding them now at a higher rate. He's always been a really, really good passer. So I just feel like he's unburdened from that responsibility and just knows that one night, might be 10, 11 shots, but the next night he can still go for 30 and have a massive game like we saw in Memphis, and that's kind of a rhythm that has repeated itself. So I think he's at peace with that. So.
Chris, with when teams are designing the defense to kind of take Ant out of it, do you feel like you guys have improved in your ability
Yes.
to still involve him in house?
Yeah, I think Ant. It starts with Ant. You know, his recognition of what's going on has gotten better and better. His ability and timing of making the right play and the right read has gotten better and better. I think, you know, his frustrations about how teams guard him, I think he now embraces it. You know, so the maturity around it's gotten better. You know, and we're just better when both Ant and Julius are guys that are flirting with triple doubles. If they're flirting with triple doubles in the stat line, then you know that means everybody's getting involved and we're making the right play. So.
Thanks, Coach.
Thank you. See you guys.